Hello everyone. My name is Richard Jung from Napakiak. I am the chairman of the CVRF Board of Directors. First, I would like to thank our residents of our 20 communities for sharing what is important to us and for making this virtual discussion possible with the pandemic going on. We wish the best for everyone during this challenging time. We are delighted to have with us today one of Alaska's senators. Please welcome Senator Dan Sullivan.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and I'm Dan Sullivan, your United States Senator, and this is kind of a version of what I would normally love to do, which is getting out to the communities and seeing all of you. The CVRF communities are near and dear to my heart. I love getting out. Appreciate the chairman offering me, and Eric, your new director, offered me the opportunity to say a few words, and I just want to thank you for the great hospitality every time I'm out in the region. You know, I told this story recently. I was in Tuxuk Bay and Nightmute, seeing the great new project, the build grant that was out there in terms of infrastructure. I just saw some of the wonderful Nelson Island dancers, and after that, had one of the students come up and she gave me a Yupik name. I was very honored by her Yupik name. She said it was actually from her grandfather, and then I asked her what it was, what it meant. I'm having a hard time pronouncing it. She said it meant little seagull. So I guess I'm the little seagull in the region, but I'm your senator too. But I just want to say thank you. Normally, I'm out there, particularly in the summer, seeing everybody, hearing from all of you, and this is kind of our best way to do it during the pandemic. I hope everybody's healthy. I hope everybody's safe. We're working hard together. We're going to get through these challenging times more resilient, stronger than ever, and I'm looking forward to your questions and having a good discussion today.
Permafrost is melting, and it's causing our homes to sink and our foundations to break. Climate change is bringing hardship to our homeowners across our communities. We are thankful for helping relocate Nukhtak to Metavelvak. We are also experiencing high levels of water causing floods up to our homes in many of our communities like Kipnak, Hooper Bay, Nukhtak, and Quinkiganak. During the flood and storms, we have to take time out of our day to tie up our boats for them not to float away. Every day, our rivers are getting wider and the seawalls are getting closer to our homes due to the erosion causing high-risk factors of losing homes to them. Many of our electricity poles are shifting and about to tip over, causing fear that they may fall into our homes that are close to them. Some of our communities do not have a road system, and boardwalks are built because it is the only suitable highway in their community. What is being done to prevent further climate changes and from destroying our lands and environments? Is there funding available to help our villages relocate?
Well, Minnie, it's a really important question, so thank you. And as you mentioned, climate change is clearly happening in our state, and we see the impacts. You see the impacts all the time. You mentioned Nukhtak and how we're looking at the relocation issue. One thing that we're starting to do in a big way, and I sit on the right committees for this, the Environment and Public Works Committee, is putting in our highway bill, putting in the funding for resilience, for infrastructure. So that means the ability to have additional monies. In the current highway bill, we have almost $1 billion in that highway bill that's already passed out of the Environment and Public Works Committee for climate change resilience. So that's going to be very important. I'm also somebody who's a huge believer in the ability to build roads in our communities, particularly in our rural communities. You know, we're a resource-rich state, but an infrastructure-poor state. So the more we can have roads, as you're talking about, particularly to go more inland from some of our coastal communities for relocation efforts and other climate change and infrastructure-related efforts, the better. I'm going to continue to work on that. Of course, we need energy. I believe in all of the above energy. That's renewables. That's anything that the community has that works for the community. Some of our communities in Alaska are all renewable, which is great. It reduces greenhouse gas emissions, but others rely on natural gas and other hydrocarbons. We need to be able to make sure we're producing all kinds of energy that can help with this. But what I'm not for are proposals like the so-called Green New Deal that would shut down any kind of natural gas or oil production in Alaska, killing thousands of jobs. The final issue that I'm very focused on as relates to climate change, how it relates to our oceans. I have been very focused, as a matter of fact, the leader on studying and making sure we can address the issue of ocean acidification. That's the issue of the warming of the oceans that can impact our fisheries very dramatically, and it goes beyond just that. One of the things that I'm proud of as your senator is I've led the charge in the Senate on cleaning up our oceans. My Save Our Seas Act passed the last Congress is all about ocean cleanup. I'm sure you're seeing ocean debris, plastics and things like that that come across the ocean from Asia. And then we're on the very close verge of Save Our Seas 2.0. That would be the most comprehensive ocean cleanup legislation ever. It's going to pass, I think, very soon. That's my bill to clean up our oceans, the ocean pollution. So these are all the important things we're working on to address the very important question you just raised.
Healthcare continues to be an ongoing issue emotionally, mentally, and physically. Some of our communities do not have consistent access to local health aides, and even if there are health aides, people have to travel to Bethel for injuries or unmet health needs in our communities. Not all, but a lot of residents are abusing alcohol and substances, even with our overcrowded homes, which leads to a lot of issues related to domestic violence, substance abuse, and alcohol abuse. We need more support in all communities, a go-to place where we can send our loved ones to because family members are the ones treating these issues without enough training in that field. How can we help bring these resources to our communities? How can we build health systems that can address these problems?
Well, look, I think the way in which the question was asked is a really important issue because you're focusing on a holistic way to look at it, and I couldn't agree more. You know, when you're talking about alcohol abuse, when you're talking about housing, when you're talking about domestic violence, all of these things obviously relate to our health. So we can't just look at it in terms of just the clinics and the hospitals, but a broader well-being. And one of the things that I've been very focused on are a number of those issues. For example, mental health, the ability to address the challenges of addiction and mental health. It's been a passion of mine to address not just alcohol addiction, but some of the drug addictions that we're seeing. So we've had a lot more resources for that, for people's mental health and addiction. I know we're going to talk about public safety, but I'm passionate about more resources for victims and survivors of domestic violence and changing our culture so we respect women and children, and they shouldn't be abused. I will continue to speak out on that. But with regard to the broader healthcare system, it's a really important issue that you raise. The Alaska Native healthcare system is actually, for our Native people in America, it's probably the gold standard. It's not perfect, but it is done very, very well relative to other Native American healthcare systems. We do need more resources beyond just Bethel into the villages, and it's something that I care deeply about. But we want to make sure that we continue to build up the Alaska Native healthcare system with more resources. During the pandemic, the IHS had an increase of over $100 million at my request to the White House to get more funding to our Alaska Native healthcare system. And then finally, I'll just say the most immediate issue right now, not only am I a strong supporter and defender of covering people with pre-existing conditions, I've fought for that, I believe in that, and I will continue to fight for that. But as we get through this pandemic, I've literally talked to the president, the vice president, everybody in the federal government. Our Alaska Native communities have to have the resources that everybody else has. We've been through, some of our rural communities have been through horrible, horrible pandemics like the Spanish flu, and we need the resources both in testing, medical personnel, and importantly, soon, I believe we're going to start to see a vaccine for the COVID-19. I'm already pressing the top federal government officials saying, make sure Alaska Native communities are on that list to surge out the vaccine and more testing so we can get through this COVID challenge stronger and more resilient and healthier than ever.
I would like to thank CVRF for providing me the opportunity to experience work through the Youth to Work program, which then allowed me to work with local businesses. Junok, for opening a world of possibilities for me. And also working as a community intern in Apostkiak. With the scarcity of jobs in our communities, many struggle financially daily to keep up with bills, for paying for food, and for paying for vehicles to gather and subsist. The cost of gathering and subsisting is unaffordable for many, which makes most people rely heavily on public assistance and unemployment. I fear that there will be no jobs for me to come home to after I complete college. I would love to come home to then provide my knowledge to help my community grow economically. How do we come up with solutions for the lack of jobs in our communities?
Stephen, it's a great question. To me, it's really probably the most important issue that we have facing our state. And by the way, thank you for hosting the Attorney General in Apostkiak. I think he had a great trip. I'm going to talk about public safety here in a minute. But your point, and even the way in which you asked the question, I think in some ways helps define the answer. We have to look at all of our communities, not just in rural Alaska, but the whole state with regard to how do we diversify opportunities for job creation. Because as you know, and you referenced it, jobs give people a sense of worth. Jobs give people a sense of dignity. And to the extent we can, we want to make sure people have jobs so they don't have to rely on unemployment insurance. That's very important. You may have seen in the CARES Act, we really plussed up unemployment insurance, but we want people to have jobs. So what are the ideas on diversification? You mentioned subsistence. I'm a huge supporter of hunting and fishing subsistence and the ability for our Alaska Native communities to take advantage of the traditional way in which they have been hunting for generations. I will always be a strong supporter of that. Second, fishing. You know, the Coastal Villages Region Fund provides all kinds of tremendous opportunities as one of our CDQ groups to provide jobs, opportunity, leadership training, and rise through the ranks in terms of these opportunities, not just in fishing, but what the whole CDQ program has. I will be a strong, and have been a strong defender of that. And then there's other opportunities. We can responsibly develop our resources and protect the environment. That is why I have supported the permitting process for the Donlin Creek mine. I think that that also provides opportunities for jobs, training, leadership. So these are some of the areas. And the final areas is local arts and crafts. I have been a defender, recently had a hearing on it, on making sure that Alaska Natives who are craftsmen, who carve ivory, walrus tusks, they have the right to do it. Right now, believe it or not, there's states that are starting to ban that. I had a bill in the Commerce Committee recently passed out of the committee that preempts the states. Says, doesn't matter, California, New Jersey, you can't discriminate against legal Alaska Native art. So we're going to continue to press that. I'm hoping to pass that through the Congress. But as you know, these artisans can provide enormous economic benefit to our different villages. So those are some of the ideas that I have that I'm pressing to have a more diversified economy, to create jobs, dignity, self-worth that comes from the hard work of good employment. Great question, by the way, Stephen.
Hi, my name is Harry Tuluk. I'm from Tuxik Bay, Alaska. I work for the Nakarmi Tribe as Transportation Director. Our way of getting to hospitals, bypass mail for stores, travel to villages by plane, and the weather is always bad and sometimes Our airstrips are bad sometimes because of the runway situation and crosswinds. The hubs are too far for most of the villages to go to the hospital. And the question now is, how do we improve freight and transportation to our communities?
Great question, and another one that I've been very focused on. First of all, bypass mail and our essential air service. I sit on the Commerce Committee, and I've been a champion of those, not just continuing the status quo, but increasing funding for those critically important services that I will always defend as your U.S. Senator. Second, I talked about infrastructure a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit more, I think, in a bit on some of the issues that I care deeply about, like water and sewer funding. But again, we need more infrastructure, and particularly as it relates to our aviation sector. So I just held this week a summit with our aviation experts and the head of the Federal Aviation Administration. And the whole focus of this summit, so this is the top federal official and his team, was Alaska aviation safety and aviation infrastructure. So to your really good question, we need that more because we don't have the roads. Our communities need the vital air service, the runways, the grading that you talk about. So we have been increasing our airport infrastructure and also, very importantly, streamlining the ability to build these kind of infrastructure, necessary infrastructure elements of our aviation sector, while adding different elements of infrastructure that increase safety. The permitting process also is something that's very important. You can have money to build a road, to build a runway, but if it takes the federal government 5 years to permit it, it's wasted money. So here's what I've been focused on: much more streamlined permitting from these federal agencies. We get the money out the door, then they should help us move forward, not be a roadblock. So these are some of the key issues that I think are critical, but as we increase aviation infrastructure in rural Alaska, it needs to be focused on safety, and it needs to be focused on, when we have the resources, to get them out the door and start building, not have a permitting system in the federal government that takes 5 or 6 years to permit a project. We're making progress on that, but we got a long way to go.
Hi, my name's James Charlie Jr. I live in one of the 20 CVRF residents. Housing continues to be the main concerns for all our CVRF region residents. The houses that were built in 1960s and 70s and the houses today are continue to be occupied by overcrowded families of all ages. Residents are worried about their homes rotting with mold, and the foundations are beginning not to be livable. The older houses are leaking, and the smell of molds come out whenever the rain hits or when springtime arrives. There is a shortage of homes available for people to use while multiple families continue to grow in a single-family environment. How can we provide more housings in our communities?
So James, great question, and I was in Fornic a couple years ago focused on this issue. So again, I had a great welcome, so thank you again, everybody, for the wonderful welcome when I was there. Look, there's a couple of areas that I think are really important, and these were ideas that I got from so many of you when I was in the region. One is we have to increase the NAHASDA funding. That's the federal government funding for Alaska Native Housing and the Housing Authority. I've been somebody who's been pushing that, and in my 6 years in the Senate, we've increased that by over $50 million, the increase. So we're making progress on that. But here's what I've learned from you, so many of you. You increase the NAHASDA funding, but again, the federal regulations on just building a single family home in rural Alaska are nuts. They're nuts. They take forever. They have permitting requirements that create houses that cost like $500,000 because of all the permitting. So one of the things that I've learned, and one of the things that we need to work on, yes, we need more resources, but we also need to make sure that people have the ability to build locally, to not import builders into Shafornik and other places like in the region, to make sure that we have the ability to put young people to work. This goes to this issue of regulations where the federal government over-regulates the ability to build anything, and then even when you're getting additional funding, you're still not seeing the results. So yes, we've increased that, but housing and housing opportunities from my perspective are a win-win. You can put people to work, you can train young men and women in these local carpentry skills. I've seen that in so many of our communities. And then of course, you can't separate housing from the issue of water and sewer. I am such a passionate believer in the fact that we need to make sure every village in Alaska has flush toilets and running water. That has been a passion of mine since I got to the Senate. My first big bill that I passed was a brand new $300 million program for disadvantaged communities like we see in Alaska. So these issues we're going to continue to work on. Yes, you're right. They matter not just to the well-being of our communities, but they're opportunities to train young Alaskans on skills that they need.
Public safety is a concern for a lot of residents in our communities where there are no opportunities to work. A common source of income for some community members is illegal marijuana and homebrew sales, which is a concern by many people in our communities. Because of past experiences of situations involved with guns, alcohol, and substance abuse, deaths related to homicide or suicide, it's hard to call home a safe haven. Residents who live in a community that have no VPOs only have the option of calling troopers who live a plane ride away to report a crime and hope for a fast response. Thankfully, locals are stepping up to protect our community members with no training whatsoever, and cases are being reported but justice is not being served. Most communities do not get help until a tragedy happens. What resources are there to address these types of issues?
So Magdalena, this is a great question and another passionate issue that I care deeply about. You know, when I was your Attorney General, I worked with our governor to launch what was called the Choose Respect strategy. As a matter of fact, in Tuxtla Bay, when I was there a couple of years ago, I saw a big Choose Respect sign. I was proud to see that. I've taken that passion to the U.S. Senate, where I've been leading on issues that relate to domestic violence and sexual assault. For example, I had a bill called the Power Act that was signed into law that would give more resources to survivors of domestic violence, particularly legal resources, with a focus on Native women. You may have seen that our great leader, the Assistant Secretary of Interior for Indian Affairs, Tara Sweeney, Nupiat leader, who is a former AFN co-chair, she just opened the cold case office in Anchorage for missing and murdered Indigenous people. That's also something that matters so much. So I am very focused on the issue of public safety, domestic violence, sexual assault, more resources. And here is a good news story. Because of the work that many of you did and the ideas that I got from many of your communities, I brought our Attorney General of the United States, William Barr, to Alaska last summer. And I said, look at these amazing people. But guess what? So many communities don't have law enforcement. My vision from the time I was Attorney General was every community in Alaska that wants a law enforcement official should get it. Every community, just like they have in the lower 48. So I'm going to continue to work on that, focus on it, and bring people who can help us to Alaska. The good news is, you may have heard, after Attorney General's Barr visit, he said, I'm going to help rural Alaska. he has directed over $60 million in federal resources to help us with law enforcement. That has created over 38 new law enforcement positions, including 15 in the CVRF region. 15, just in the last year. That is progress, historic progress. We're going to keep pushing on it. As long as I'm your senator, I'm going to be a passionate advocate for the issue of public safety and combating the horrible problem we have in our state, and let's face it, in our country, with domestic violence and sexual assault. I think many of you know my wife is Athabascan. I have 3 daughters. This is an issue of the utmost importance to me.
In many of our communities, we do not have water and sewer. We pack rainwater and cut ice to melt in the wintertime for drinking water. We use honey buckets as toilets and basins we add water to for washing our hands and disinfect it with little Clorox. The same water is used until it gets gray from dirt and soap residue, as the same water is repeatedly used to wash our family members' hands after dinner and after using the bathroom. This is not safe water for viruses like COVID-19. If any of our residents catch the virus, we will need to disinfect, keep washing our hands, keep clean, and this will be an issue without any public water systems. What resources are there that can improve these issues?
So Daryl, I couldn't agree with you more. Everything you said is something I'm a big believer in. I think I've already touched on this issue, but I'll touch on it again because you're so right. I think it's outrageous, and I've said it on the Senate floor, I've said it in hearings, that we have over 30 communities in Alaska that don't have running water or flush toilets. By the way, one thing I love to brag about our Alaska Native communities. They're some of the most patriotic communities in America. Alaska Natives serve at higher rates in the military than any other ethnic group in the country. And I was very proud to get my Vietnam Veterans Native Allotment Act passed that brings the Vietnam veterans who missed the ability to apply for their Native allotment justice, so they can do it now. Why am I saying that? Because when I make this argument, I say so often, some of the most patriotic places in America don't have running water and flush toilets. It's an outrage. So as I mentioned earlier, one of my first bills as your senator was a $300 million new program that passed. President Obama signed it into law to help communities that don't have any running water or flush toilets. The Ports and Harbors bill that we just passed out of the Environment Public Works Committee has another $500 million. That was my bill as well. So we are very focused on it. I couldn't agree with you more. Here's one silver lining, I think, from the pandemic. As you mentioned, the CDC says wash your hands 5 times a day to prevent the COVID. Well, what if you don't have running water? How can you do that? So I think that this pandemic has highlighted this issue and other issues like lack of broadband that we're going to make even more progress on. One thing I have done, CARES Act money that has gone out to communities, gone out to Native corporations, gone out to the states. I got the Treasury Secretary to issue guidance on more flexibility for that CARES Act money, and the Treasury Department did say that it can be used for water and sewer infrastructure. That's a good opportunity, as a lot of communities still have CARES Act money, to use that to help address this super important problem as you describe, and one that I care deeply about. Great question. I'm glad you raised it.
Communities are addressing the need for water and sewer and overcrowding homes. If one gets sick, a whole home is affected. With the lack of housing and overcrowded homes, there is no way to prevent quarantining to oneself or travelers. We are concerned about our region, health aides, and patients across our communities for if and when the coronavirus hits. With all the issues, we have a high risk on contracting the sickness and spreading. We are concerned that all of our communities will have to refer to one hospital, which is in Bethel. And there is not enough room for all of us to be treated if our pandemic hits home. Does our senator have plans to prevent the spread of COVID-19 in rural Alaska communities? How do we decrease the risk?
So Anna, it's a great question and a really important question. And I can tell you, and I think I mentioned it earlier, from the moment this pandemic hit, I was reaching out to our leadership in all the different regions, to so many of you, to our Native health leaders, saying, what do you need and how much do you need of it? And this is, again, one that I literally went to the top levels of our federal government, the president, the vice president, their cabinet, saying Alaska, during the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, had more people killed per capita than any place in America. We cannot forget the great people of my state. We certainly can always improve, but I'm proud to say that the federal government has focused on testing, in particular in rural Alaska. This summer, I again pressed the senior leaders of the federal government and said, as fishing communities are undertaking fishing, there needs to be a surge in not just testing, but medical personnel in case we have major outbreaks in places like fishing communities and processing plants. We were able to get that as well. And then, of course, in the CARES Act, I was one of the strong advocates to make sure that there was a set aside of $8 billion for our Alaska Native and Lower 48 Indians who are particularly vulnerable to these pandemics and viruses. Of course, we're going to continue to monitor this, but as I mentioned earlier, the other area that's so important is both water and sewer. Have to have it, have to do it. We'll continue to press on it. How can you abide by CDC guidelines if you don't have running water? And the vaccine. Just like testing, I have already been pressing the very senior levels of the federal government saying, when this vaccine is ready to go and safe, we need to make sure that we have the capacity, the infrastructure to surge it all over America, including my state and some of the most remote communities and villages in my state. I'm getting that commitment now. We're already working on making sure we have that capacity. So I'm going to continue to advocate for you and healthcare and making sure we have the resources available to get through this pandemic stronger and more resilient than ever. These are two questions from some of our younger viewers, and I love to have them. One is just about how rural Alaska is a unique place. I always call it the heart and soul of our state, not just unique. It is Alaska. And it says, what have you done in your career to better develop the understanding of what rural Alaska represents? Well, let me talk a little bit about that. First of all, as I mentioned, as your senator, I get out to the communities as frequently as possible, literally visiting dozens, and importantly, bring people out, like the Attorney General, who then see things and want to help us. Some of you know I brought the Secretary of Education, the Secretary of Defense, many of these senior officials, and of course, other senators. But in my own background, when I was the Attorney General of the United States, when I was Attorney General of Alaska, I headed the governor's rural sub-cabinet. That was leading cabinet officials from the state government to go to all the different rural communities. This is where I became impassioned about issues like water and sewer, like our Alaska Native veterans, like domestic violence and sexual assault and launching the Choose Respect campaign, and the issue of public safety, and that every community who wants one should have a public safety officer. I had those convictions before I became your senator, and I brought those to the Senate because I feel very, very passionate about these. But perhaps most importantly, from my perspective, understanding rural communities, our Alaska Native culture and heritage, is just through my own family. I am a very blessed man. I married a wonderful Athabascan woman from the interior, my wife Julie. Some of you may have heard of my mother-in-law, who unfortunately just recently passed away, Mary Jane Fate, who was a real strong interior elder. She grew up in Rampart on the Yukon River, and that culture and heritage that is part of my family's background. We have a fish camp up on the Yukon River near Rampart that my family and I have been fishing. They've been fishing forever, time immemorial. I've been going up there for 25 years. It's just embedded in my family, and it's something that I respect and have grown to love. And maybe that's the most important thing in terms of respect that I bring to the culture and understanding of rural Alaska. The second question, of course, several people from some of the coastal villages, communities, some of the young people came and visited my office. We had a blast. These young Alaskans were great, and I definitely told them I hire interns. I hire great interns. I hire interns from all over the state. They come, I work them hard, beware, but they learn a lot, they have a great time. So if you're interested, please, as I told these young leaders, apply for an internship in my office. We'd be glad to look at it. We'd be glad to hire you. You can learn a lot about DC, you can have a lot of fun, and you'll learn a lot about Alaska issues, because that's all we do. The second question related to that is the issue of applying for a Service Academy nomination to the Coast Guard Academy or the Naval Academy or the West Point or the Air Force Academy. So please, if you're interested, reach out to my office in Anchorage. As I mentioned, Alaska has more veterans per capita than any state in the country. Some of you might know I'm a colonel in the Marines. I'm still serving. I've been in the Marines for 26 years. Alaska Natives serve at higher rates in the military than any other ethnic group in the country. So we have double special patriotism in our state. So if you're interested in applying for a nomination to one of the service academies, reach out to my office in Anchorage. We can provide the additional information. We put together a team of interviewers, and then we try, and I try personally, to get all the Alaskans who are interested placed and accepted into these service academies. It's a great education. It's a great opportunity, and I am very passionate about helping as many Alaskans, especially our Alaska Native community, to apply to these service academies, get nominations, and serve your country. So we want to help as much as we can. These are great questions. Come be our intern. Apply for the service academies. Your senator and my team will definitely help you with that.
Hello, Senator Sullivan. My name is Larson Hunter from Scammon Bay, Vice President of the CVRF Board. Thank you for taking the time to listen to some of our region residents and their concerns, and also for providing some answers to their questions. We want this to be the start of an ongoing and productive dialogue to help address these ongoing concerns in our communities. In light of this ongoing pandemic and the changes it has forced upon everyone, we appreciate that you took the time to interact with us. We invite you to come to our communities once the situation of this pandemic allows, to revisit these and other ongoing challenges facing our people. We have many challenges and are always faced with new ones. It is always encouraging to have a voice in DC aware of our concerns. We are also looking forward to meeting you in person, and until this day comes, we extend our gratitude for your consideration and your time. Senator Sullivan, on behalf of the staff of Coastal Villages, the Board of Directors, and our region residents, thank you for making this a successful event.